anybody could choose to do it, to participate through.
Yeah.
So I think we have a responsibility to get together unless there's a valid reason to do that.
Trust me, this is great.
But putting it on YouTube,
Okay.
yeah, that's great.
You ready?
Are we there?
Okay, we're good.
We're good? Okay. So it is 12:09, my goodness. So anyway, just wanted to welcome all of you today to our CVTA nominating committee meeting, our first meeting. We are here together in our Plan RVA boardroom, which feels but good. So just thanking all of us for fulfilling the requirement that was laid upon us by our chair of CVA. And so at this time, we do, I believe, have a quorum. And I don't see that we have to say that everything that we're doing has been met with a virtual meeting, but we are being on YouTube live streaming. So first on the agenda is consideration amendments to the meeting agenda. And so you have the agenda before you. Are there any changes, amendments with that? If not, entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the agenda. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passed. Nays have the same opportunity. Hearing none. And so my opening comments, I think I already made them, and that is that we're here, and so I can skip to the overall process and the charge. But we have been appointed by the chair, Chairman Thornton. And he reached out to us to ask us to fulfill a requirement that is in our bylaws for the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, and that is a nominating committee for new officers, and that will be done in July, the change of officers. When we were at the meeting, the charge came that we would be electing the chair, the vice chair of the body and of finance. But after reading through our bylaws, and I think we're correct in talking to our legal counsel, we are charged with nominating the chair and the vice chair of the full body. And so as you read through, you will see that the finance committee has their own members, and they elect their own chair and vice chair. And so since I have taken care of 2 and 3 at the same time,
Madam Chair, go ahead.
How does the finance committee, how do you get on the finance? Is that appointed by the chair?
No, sir.
Okay.
Now, at the organizational meeting, and I've had this conversation, with Mr. Peterson prior to the meeting, my recollection was that we came forward and recommended changes to the proposed bylaws, and our attorney, was there as well and can provide additional information. But we said that, the chairman, as proposed, was going to be appointing the remaining 2 members of the finance committee. That the 3 members were coming from the big 3. And the remaining 2 members would be appointed by the chair. I came forward, with the concern that that was concentrating a great deal of power within the chairmanship at that meeting. At that point, I remember Mr. Peterson asking me, would you have a motion? And I remember at that time, the conversation had gone to the body. The authority should be electing the remaining 2 members. And I believe that is what the outcome of that meeting was, but I'll defer to Mr. Gregory.
I'll be happy to point you to page 7 in the bylaws. Each of you have a copy of that. Article 5.
I apologize, committee, for sending us.
absolutely, this is a discussion, sir.
I know,
So
this
we
is-
are fine.
I
This is
agree.
what-
It's important to address this because the way the organizational meeting of the CVTA occurred, if you recall, there was some issues that needed to be resolved by the body with regard to the election of the chair and the vice chair and the chair of the finance committee. So those issues were resolved. And one part of that, of course, was what Mr. Williams just described, how the other members, the other 2 members of the finance committee were to be appointed. And as directed by the body, we made an amendment to the bylaws, which was approved, to change the appointment of the two remaining members of the Finance Committee to be appointed by the authority rather than the chair. So that you'll see that's reflected in Article 5, subsection B2, down there towards the bottom of the page. So that was adopted and approved by the body. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So in that case, we need to nominate those two people for the authority to be able to act on. It's a nominating committee.
No, the nominating committee's charge, that's sort of a sideline.
Good question.
This body here is solely charged with nominating a chair and a vice chair of the full body, the full authority board, not the finance committee, okay? And that's part of the organizational meeting, that how that political decision, if you will, was resolved, resulted in, I think, some confusion because the finance committee had their organizational meeting right then and there as well, so they could elect the chair, their own chair. But am I getting that wrong?
All
Well,
right, well, let me follow up if you don't mind,
sure.
because, I want to continue this discussion. Now, Ms. Gregory, you said two things. You said we were only charged with, by the chairman, for two positions, the chairman, I believe, and the vice chairman.
Well, he initially said, he said the chair and the vice chair of the full body and the chair of finance. And so,
But we don't do the chair of finance, okay? So that one comes
Right.
off the table,
mhm,
Right,
all right?
that's correct.
So what I'm trying to get to, what is the charge of the chairman? And then what is the responsibility of the authority in terms of the positions that, my understanding was that would come from the authority? That would be the chairman, the vice chairman, and the two remaining members of the finance committee.
May I sort of interject? I think there's, because of the process that both you and Mr. Gregory decided, there's silence on how those remaining two members. And so I think there's probably paths forward. And I don't know, Mrs. Page, if you had a chance to talk with Mr. Thornton about this, but if you look at page 2 of the bylaws, section 3 of Article 3, that's where it specifies the charge of the nominating committee, and that's where it's specific to the officers of the authority, not those two remaining members of the finance committee. I would presume that the authority could take or leave recommendations that this committee came up with regard to those two seats, and that could be the bridge, if you will. And then we also have a proposal of bylaws to address the membership of the Port of Virginia. And so this could potentially, I think Mr. Gregory could come up with a solution to kind of bridge these two things. Because the section that you read just simply says that the two members are selected by the authority, but there's no sort of mechanism to recommend what the authority
Okay.
decides.
so that's not even, I don't think what I heard Mr. Harden say, and the answers are being the same. It may be, but we have a finance committee. How are the members of the finance committee chosen? I mean, I know this, the three with the highest population. I have an understanding of that.
Right.
And then there are two other members that are on there, but and I know how it went this year.
Right.
But do they just remain indefinite, or who selects the five that sit on there?
It simply says the authority.
The authority. So
So
they,
is the authority appointing them or recommending?
the
Appointed.
authority is appointing them based upon the authority in Article 5, subsection B2. They're appointed by the authority. So
And as the three largest jurisdictions only have one person on the CVTA, they're automatic. Just through those three.
That's my understanding.
that's correct.
So it's there's only two that can come from anywhere else.
That's correct.
And you said they're appointed, so I don't want to parse words. Does appointed mean elected, agreed upon, consensus?
Well, I think it's
My-
automatic here because there's only, it has to be the person.
Well, if you say appointed by the authority, who speaks for the authority?
Well, my staff interpretation would be that for the authority to take any action, there would have to be a motion, a second, and a vote.
Correct.
And so that appointment, I mean,
That's how the appointment would
I
occur.
would.
Okay, then I'm
Yeah.
fine with that, okay, as long as I'm making sure that what I understood at that organization meeting is being carried forward. Going back to the chairman or chair lady's, recent statement, that the 3 members of the finance committee automatically comes from the big 3 largest jurisdictions, and that the remaining 2 members come from the authority. And, what you just said, Martha, I agree and confirm that we would have to elect them from the authority with a motion and a second. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Even though we
But-
already know who they are, because there's only one. It
But-
has to be Frank Thornton, Kevin Carroll, and LeVar Stone,
But
because there's nobody else from any of those jurisdictions who's a member of the CVTA
Right, it
to be on
says,
the committee.
it says
Right,
the
plus
remaining 2 are
Plus
are
two.
appointed by.
Plus
the
2
authority.
is an issue.
so,
So
But that, but
the full board has to.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
good.
That the appointment of the 2 remaining members of the finance committee is not part of this committee's.
Absolutely. We're just getting all of this ironed out.
I understand. I just wanted.
And
to
I
make that
think for
clear.
those that are viewing,
So
if you were there for the organization meeting that day,
You'd
I
understand.
think you need to have it ironed out as well.
that's-
Because we had, I think we were in closed sessions and,
We-
time out and everything
We
else.
took a time out and then, we had a sidebar and then we came back with an agreement.
We had an organizational meeting and everything.
The authority.
And so, yes, Mr. Hodges.
I'm sorry, in the interest, I understand what the bylaw said.
Mhm.
And it may not be our role to make a recommendation, but in order to sort of avoid confusion, should the nominating committee not at least suggest something, put it on the floor, it would take a change in bylaws to do that.
It would.
Yeah.
It would take a change in bylaws and I
I'm not
was,
suggesting we do that here because we're not charged to do that. I'm just suggesting should
What would be the change, John, that you would be looking for? I
that the
mean,
nominating committee not only
Okay,
nominates the 2 positions for the full committee, but the 2 positions for the finance committee that are not addressed.
so this is not just the chairman's request. What you're saying in the bylaws, the nominating committee is only charged with those 2 nominations.
Right now.
Correct.
Okay, I'm clear.
And so should, in the interest of smooth operation, so we don't have,
Agreed.
that at least something's out there and the full committee's gonna do what they're
Well,
gonna
it
do.
looks like, the needle jumped.
Yeah.
Somewhere during the meeting and we didn't address it because as Madam Chair was just, sharing, there was a lot going on. So there were changes being made, in that meeting. And so this could be a simple matter of, it really didn't get carried forward in the bylaws the way that we probably thought it would, with the change of going with the authority, appointing the remaining 2 members. It would follow that if we're going to do the other authority appointed positions, the nominating committee, why wouldn't we do all of them?
Just
that's
put
the
something
question.
on the table. Rather than
So I suggested something, but I think your counsel is that this committee, the nominating committee, should remain focused on its explicit charge. Would it be conceivable that because we do know that the bylaws are going to be subject of discussion, that this would be
Yeah.
the opportunity to address it, and then the charge of the nominating committee would follow that process, but absent a change in the bylaws, the committee needs to focus on the
Right.
charge at
yeah,
hand.
what you're suggesting now is sort of clouding,
Future.
I think. Yeah, that would be a future decision. That would be a future amendment to the bylaws. And in order to effectuate that amendment, you have to follow the process under Article 8 in the bylaws. for
I
change.
assume the staff is gonna report, the committee is gonna adopt a report with recommendations for what we're charged to fill, the chairman and vice chairman. Could we not in that report say, we didn't make a recommendation for candidates for vacancies
Well, Finance Committee for me.
So we point out that there is no one making recommendations, and rather just throwing it open in a meeting to anyone. If you want to have an orderly process, we think when it's appropriate, we're not recommending anybody, but we recommend that the full committee consider a change in the bylaws, since we have to make a change in the bylaws that might make the process smoother and avoid potential for, distractions like we've got in this meeting right now.
Madam Chair, I agree with John, that is, to me, a good recommendation that we're bringing this forward. I mean, we're all green alike,
Yeah.
okay? This is new to all of us. So to expect that everything got lined up perfectly, in that organizational meeting, that the moon and the stars are all aligned the way we wanted them. So the fact that we're here and we're having this discussion, I think would be beneficial to the larger body to be privileged to that.
I would suggest that for today, we do as Eric has suggested, make our nominations for chair and vice chair, and then give Frank Thornton fair warning that his old CVTA committee's got to make a decision on the other two. And so that he's not caught off guard, thinking that this is going to come to him, to make sure he's prepared to have recommendations from the floor for the other two, because that's going to have to be.
I totally agree. He needs to be made aware of this, but I will still, go back to John's statement. The whole body needs to be informed as to why we're only doing part of the nominations and not all the nominations.
John said it very well, and we're suggesting that a bylaw change be considered at some time to add those two to the nomination.
The bylaw change would require what, 2 consecutive meetings?
But that won't solve the problem we have right now. That has to be-
No, we're gonna do our job today. I don't have any problem going forward with what we've got in front of us.
Because if we went a step further, and then we'll move on to what we're doing. If we went a step further, if we look at the structure today, we have three positions. But 2 of those positions are already held by those that are on
Yes, ma'am.
the full body. So you have Chairman Thornton and Vice Chair Carl that are sitting in the full body in offices, but then they're also almost like automatically on the finance. So it doesn't give the opportunity for anybody else in that locality, even though they would be from the same locality, but a different face on the finance.
Yeah, because you can't put anybody on the committee that's not a member of the main committee, on the subcommittee. I wouldn't think.
But don't they have more than one representative on the full body, just one?
It's the chief elected officer or the designee.
Anyway, so Tessa, any other questions? Agree.
I'll go to the issue at hand, though. As we've been going through this organization, and I mentioned to you, I have talked to Kevin and Frank both about their positions. Both of them are willing to continue. And my feeling is that right now we haven't, as Frank Thornton has mentioned, this is like a birthing away from this committee, and we haven't finished the process yet. And to sit there and start making changes midstream is probably not a good idea. It's not a good time to change doctors in the middle of a delivery. So I'm thinking we need to continue with Frank Thornton and Kevin Carroll as our nominees for the coming year. And our bylaws allow them to serve 2 years. So,
I as well have talked to Mr. Thornton, I've talked to Mr. Carroll, talked to Mr. Peterson, other members and of the authority. And the consensus, what I'm hearing back is you know, we all feel like, you know, this is not the time to change leadership since, you know, we just, as Canova termed it, been birthed and we're all growing together. It would make sense that we have this continuity going forward. So I'm going to, if that was a motion, Mr. Pearson, I'm going to endorse your motion.
Well, I mean, it can be, but I'd rather hear what everybody else thinks.
Well, we'll have discussion on the motion.
I'm looking to Mr. Hodges now. I see him wiping his brow.
This is bringing back memories. Just, and I don't disagree at all, just a better understanding. Mayor Stoney, would he stay as the chair of the finance for all the positions, basically?
That's
We
up to
can,
them.
but that's up to the.
Because that's not our charge, so,
Well, I'm just, so.
He'll still be on it.
He'll
because he's-
still, yeah, he'll always be on it. We just, so the finance committee decides their chair.
Besides that,
I got it.
That was one of the changes that, you know, we brought forward at the organizational meeting.
Interesting. And the membership, we're just discussing this. And all of a sudden, the membership, those two positions that are kind of thrown out on the table to flop around, they become significant. And who's the
Absolutely.
chair of the finance committee? Becomes very significant.
right now, the two are myself and Carlos Brown. Of the two,
I
not,
know,
not the ones that have to be appointed by the full CVTA.
so I can support if somebody made that motion, a motion to keep in place who we got, but it seems like it makes more significant the issue of the vacancies on the
Finance committee. We agree.
But apparently, we don't have that authority in this committee.
No, we
so
don't.
That's,
I'm just making a comment, discussion.
so as we discussed it, I am not in disagreement with anything that has been said. I am in strong agreement that absolutely we should mention, and I will talk to Chairman Thornton and just refresh what he explained to me was our duty, and also what the bylaw says our duties are. And so we will clarify that in a discussion. Also, I'm in agreement with Mr. Hodges and with Mr. Williams that absolutely the bylaws and maybe the revision or the review of the process that we need to look at that, because it absolutely, for me, as I sit and think about it, it is absolutely important. And the decision of the chair and the vice chair and the full body is important when you come to the whole entire finance committee. And so I do think that to have a nominating committee, it would make sense that we would get together for more than two positions on a body that's entrusted to us to do that. We're entrusted to make the decision or the recommendation for the full body, but not entrusted to the chairs of the subcommittees. And so then does it become the chairs of all the subcommittees, or does it become the chair of finance? And so I think that would be left open for discussion of the full body to take, we just plant the seed, and with legal counsel, they'll work that out. Won't you, sir?
We'll do our best, yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
One thing I did hear, and I want us to always keep in mind, I've heard it over and over and over and over, is that when making decisions, that we look at the diversity and the equality of all of our decisions, i.e. to look at the potential of what it holds for every locality, regardless of how big your locality is or not. And when I say quality, I'm not just talking about race, but I'm talking about race and gender. And so going forward, I hope that we will keep that in mind. Delegate McQuinn made a very strong statement that opening day about that. And if we ever needed support, I think we need that support And I think that not only for that support, but I think that it is the right thing to do. I think that's the right thing to do. So with that being said, we've heard all the discussions on it, but we have not.
Madam Chair, just to address one of the points you made, if I may. The nominating committee at this point is tasked with nominating a chair or submitting names for chair and vice chair. The bylaws do conceive that subordinate officers, like a treasurer or a secretary, for instance, could be provided for in the future. So I would think that if they are at some point, and the bylaws are amended to reflect that through the proper process, that the nominating committee could also have that authority as well. But just so there is that possibility.
Well, thanks for bringing it to our attention, because, you know, we don't want to be here 6 months from now discussing those positions like we're discussing right now, the remaining 2 positions in the finance committee. So thank you.
Absolutely. And so is there any more discussion on at this time, or if not, are we ready to entertain a motion on recommendations for the nominees, or do we have to have another meeting, or what is your consensus?
The motion I just said. Frank,
I'll second that motion, Madam Chair.
Okay, so it has been moved and second that this nominating committee would nominate Supervisor Frank Thornton as chair of the full body, and Supervisor Kevin Carl is vice chair for another term for the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. Now, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposition has the same opportunity. There are no nays, so our nominations are as the motion, and the motion is carried. And so with that being said, next meeting.
In the interest of the diversity you're talking about, I think it would be very important if the new Kent supervisor started considering moving up into leadership in CVTA and preparing herself for the following year.
Interesting.
Interesting comments. Thank you so much for that, sir.
No pressure.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
I was like, who we have a new kick up the right? You got me thinking about that. And so, with all of this being said and done, I would think that at a meeting on Friday, that we could come to the chair, and I will contact the chair and tell him that we are ready to present our nominees.
Is that on the agenda for this?
Here's a report. You have a placeholder on the agenda for a report from the nominating committee. And so I would assume that the chair would be able to convey all information that was discussed today.
Absolutely, ma'am. We would like to have a permanent place on that agenda.
Until this matter is.
Yes, ma'am.
So that, I think what Martha, I'm not putting words in your mouth. So what John and I discussed about sharing, you know, what we encountered here today, when you said all of our discussions, that would include this?
I'll defer to Mr. Gregory. I think there's 2 places on the agenda because, as you know, the agendas have been distributed. So I think you have a couple of options. There's always an opportunity at the beginning of every meeting to amend the agenda. There's a nominating committee report, and there's also a section where the matter of amending the bylaws will be introduced. So there are multiple places in the agenda on Friday that.
May I ask a question to our attorney? It seems to me, you know, to make the most sense, particularly when you're looking for context about what the issue is to include this with the report. Yeah, that's just, do you have any problem with that, Mr. Gregory? You know, that we would include with our agreed upon recommended nominees for 2 positions, to also include a discussion, if you will, or at least the inclusion of what we encountered and what we discussed in this meeting. And again, is context. You know, we're talking about, we were tasked with doing the job. We got here in the meeting, we had these discussions, these issues surfaced, so therefore we want to bring this forward, you know, to the whole body. What's wrong with that?
Nothing. In fact, that's what I was going to suggest.
I wasted all.
You were very eloquent.
He should just-
Very good.
yes.
Whatever you say, sir.
I didn't want to step on anybody's toes.
I'm gonna say 20 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna be out of here.
In fact, Madam Chair, members of the committee, what I was going to suggest is you have a two-pronged report. Number one, the chief task being to nominate or submit the names of Frank Thornton for chair and Mr. Carroll for vice chair for election by the authority for another one-year term. And then number two would be to, and this is what I just jotted down here, to recommend a bylaw, an amendment to the bylaws to amend Article 3, subsection C, to vest the nominating committee with authority to recommend candidates for appointment to two seats on the finance committee to be appointed by the authority ultimately. So that's what I would suggest you include in your report. And the authority can do what it wills with those two items. They could conceivably, when the item for the bylaws comes up on the agenda, they could discuss that recommendation further and direct staff to amend the bylaws that will be discussed at that time. And that the sole amendment at this point is to add the Port Authority as a member of the authority in the bylaws. So at that time, the bylaw amendment process, let's see here. They have to present the bylaw amendment for reading at a first meeting and then a subsequent reading where they can be acted upon. Now, at the first reading, you could further amend the bylaws, right? So you could say, we do the first reading of the amendment for the port to add the Port Authority member. And then Madam Chair or a member of this committee could say further to the nominating committee's report, we recommend the authority amend the bylaws pursuant to what we reported on earlier. And if the body chooses to approve that, you would take that action at that point. That would also serve as the first reading of that proposed amendment, which would occur at that time. You check that box, and then in the subsequent meeting, they come back to the second reading and action. So you could achieve that if the authority is in favor.
Sounds like a plan to me, Mr. President. Makes too much
You can send
sense.
that to me if you know.
We'll
Yes, ma'am.
prepare something. We'll work with Mr. Gregory and
We'll- yeah.
write you up a report.
If you would,
That's why you're
copy
chairman.
all of this, so.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I believe
If we
The-
can offer any support.
you get a draft report of the committee, and that will be included in there, and we'll provide some points on the process if you want
Okay.
to proceed with that.
Perfect.
Cool.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you say that all again? I really enjoyed it.
So, so as we said, church and all hearts and minds are clear. If we have no more discussion, I think our task today has been completed for today. Unless something comes up in our full body meeting on Friday. At that time, if it does, then we'll schedule a next meeting. If not, we will stand in adjournment today. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.